Hi, this is Nahid. Today we're going to do an Enneagram overview, and I'm going to focus in on how it might be a useful tool to help you be more effective at work. So typically you're not going to see the Enneagram in a work environment because it's a pretty deep and complicated tool. But I like it for a lot of reasons that I'll tell you in a minute. Before I do that, the most popular assessments you will see in work setting are the disc or something like the disc. So it might be the social styles model or it might be the insights color model. Those are the ones that I've heard of a lot recently. And essentially, these models measure how people interact with the environment. Are they more driving with the environment? Are they more responsive with the environment? Are they more outgoing? Are they more people oriented? Are they more task oriented? And they put you in four quadrants and they help the team understand how each of those four quadrants behaves differently and responds differently. And this is an excellent tool to help teams get along more effectively. So usually when people are pushing each other's buttons on teams, it's because they're opposite social styles. So this is a really valuable tool for that kind of thing. And it's probably the best tool that you can use in an organization that's trying to get people on teams to interact more effectively together. Another tool that you'll often see in organizations is the Myers-Briggs. It's a very popular tool for self-development, and you'll see this image here has all these combinations of four letters, and most people know their combination of four letters, or they at least knew it at one time. And the Myers-Briggs is a completely different type of assessment that helps you get to know more of yourself better, but it doesn't tell you anything about development. It just tells you more about your unique way of perceiving the world and interacting with the world and thinking about the world. And it's really nice to read the descriptions of your personality. So it just helps you get more in tune to yourself. And a lot of organizations do use this assessment to help people learn more about each other. So it takes it more, maybe a step deeper than the disc. The Enneagram, on the other hand, is more complicated and deeper. But the reason I like to use it is because most of the time when I coach clients, well, we start out in a surface level way with a work issue that they perhaps want to resolve, or a career issue they want to resolve, or even a time management issue they want to resolve, or a personal life transition. Eventually, what happens with almost everybody is they start getting some insight on how they might be banging their head against the wall. And then most of the people I work with start getting more and more interested in, well, let me dig a little deeper and find out how I'm getting in my own way. Because if I can find that out, then I can remove the one thing that I keep banging my head against the wall for, and I can really get to a much higher level of functioning. I can be much more effective. Many of the things that I've been struggling with for years will disappear because I will be able to get rid of the one thing that's holding me back. So the Enneagram is a great tool for kind of zooming in on that, your inner core conflict. And the Enneagram is not the only tool I use for that. I use a couple of other tools as well, but the Enneagram is one of them because it's really great at helping you see your blind spots. And so this is why I think it also can be a great development tool at work. So the Enneagram looks kind of complicated, but it basically just means nine figure with 9 points on it. And it's made up of three different shapes, a circle, a triangle, and then this kind of flowing seven-pointed figure that represents how energy flows from one number to another. I'm not going to get into that as much right now, but just to say that there are a lot of different ways to understand the Enneagram and that make it a little bit less complicated. What I like about the Enneagram is that there are a lot of ways to divide it up so that those nine numbers don't seem as overwhelming. And there are a lot of threes in the Enneagram. So I'm going to talk about a few threes. So typically they group the Enneagram in three threes. So they group the Enneagram in the 8, 9, and 1 as one group of 3, the 2, 3, and 4 as another group of 3, and the 5, 6, and 7 as another group of 3. And they say several things about these groups of 3s. So for the 8, 9, and 1, they say that their primary emotion is anger, while the 2, 3, and 4 have either grief or loss or shame or image. So they're kind of confused about the different things they say about that. And I'll give you more information on that in a second. And then the 5, 6, and 7, they say mainly come from fear as their deepest core emotion. So the way you would use that to help yourself decide what your number is say, when I melt down, when I'm at my worst, when I'm completely disintegrating as a human being and I'm feeling absolutely awful, am I usually angry? Am I usually overcome with anxiety and overwhelm? Or am I spiraling down in negative self talk and shame? So, the way to use this tool, because it's a deep tool, is to think about when you're completely stressed out and melting down. Because most of us, when we're not stressed out, we're able to put our best foot forward and we exhibit pretty mature behaviors. In order to find your blind spot, you have to find out when you're acting immature. So when you're kind of aware that you're overreacting to something, that's when you can observe yourself and begin to see what your Enneagram type might be. So why would we care about looking at ourselves when we're melting down? It's because when we're melting down, we're at our most ineffective. And that's usually when our blind spots add to our downward spiral and make us less and less effective and end up sabotaging our best intentions. And I'll explain a little bit more how that works as I go through this show. So, with anger as the core emotion, also they talk about the different spiritual centers because a lot of people use the Enneagram for spiritual growth. And so the 8, 9, and 1, they say come from their gut. The 2, 3, and 4 come from their heart. And the 5, 6, and 7 come from the head. So when they talk about it spiritually, they'll often talk about the 8, 9, and 1 have a gut center. They're more instinctive. The 2, 3, and 4 have a heart center. They're more into feelings and emotions. And the 5, 6, and 7 have more of head center. So they'll intellectualize something. They won't be as in touch with their feelings. So that's how those 3 triads work. And again, the best way to use these triads to help figure out your type is to kind of figure out what you're mostly feeling when you're melting down. And in the live session that we had today, we had people talk about their meltdowns, and there was a lot of interesting conversation. Like, yeah, when I'm really, really upset, I'm usually not awash in shame. Usually I'm really angry, or usually I'm really upset, or usually I'm feeling really bad about myself. So that was the kind of discussion that helped people eliminate numbers that they were not and get a little bit clear on numbers they were. There's another way that we divide up the triads, the 9 numbers, into triads on the Enneagram that's kind of interesting. And that is in energy. And this is really a helpful tool to me because I'm able to look at people and sort of sense their energy. And often I can type people a little bit better if I'm looking at a combination of things, but one of them being this energy. So now these triads, of course, the numbers aren't grouped next to each other, but you'll see they do follow a pattern. So the 7, 8, and 3 have driving energy, really, really big energy. And so what that means is they tend to drive their energy out towards other people. The 1, 6, and 2 have what we call responsive energy. And what that means is they tend to notice other people's energy and they play off that. So they respond to other people's energy. The 4, 5, and 9 have what we call withdrawn energy. And what that means is they withdraw into themselves. It doesn't mean necessarily that they're all introverted, but it does mean that they tend to withdraw into themselves for energy, so they get more inner energy. So they're closer to introversion in some cases. Unfortunately, there are no hard, fast rules with the Enneagram because this is this is deep stuff that you're getting to. Everybody's got their own unique flavor of it. So these models can give you patterns and they can give you things to look at, but they don't pretend to give you all the answers. And different people have used the shape very differently and combined their different bodies of knowledge on it so that people can find themselves in a slot. But I don't know if you're ever going to find yourself perfectly in one slot. And what you may find is a little bit of yourself in all of the numbers. So don't worry, don't be too concerned about trying to fit in a number, but try to look at this as, where are my blind spots? Where can I develop? Okay, so that's the energy part of it. Let me tell you, how would you pick out? So if I am looking at energy, if you walk into a room and somebody's energy commands the room, they're most likely a 7 or an 8 or a 3. The 8 typically will have a very commanding energy. They're the kind of person that just everybody naturally looks to. They walk into the room and they just seem like the authority figure. And that's the good part of that energy. The bad part of that energy is they can be scary when they get mad. So, if people are afraid of someone, it's a good chance that they might be an 8. It's not ever for sure, but that's an indicator. Now, for a 7, their energy is also really powerful, but it's powerful in another way. And I would say more like effervescence or charisma. 7s tend to be very active. They don't exactly run around with their heads cut off, but they very much are constantly looking for joyful experiences and going from one joyful experience to another. So their energy is very joyful and they tend to spread joy. So I would say someone with a lot of charisma, there's a good indication that they may be a 7. Now, a 3 also has big energy. They may be charismatic too, and they may be commanding too, but the difference is that the 3 is more polished because 3s are accomplishers, and 3 energy is the very accomplished energy where you go out and you wow the room, but not because you're witty, but maybe because you're impressive. So you have pedigree, you have really great credentials, you have plaques around the wall. You're dressed impeccably. And that's why people are wowed by you because they're just amazed by how much you've accomplished. It's not so much that you're making them feel good about themselves, whereas a 7 will have that kind of energy that makes everybody feel happy around them. So the big energy people are easier to see on the energy scale. The responsive energy people are harder to see because they tend to respond to your energy. So, however you're being, if you're with a responsive energy person, they tend to be right in sync with you energetically. So, it's kind of hard to see the blue numbers from an energy standpoint. But from the withdrawn type, sometimes the way you can see them is that you get this feeling with them that no matter how much you talk to them and how much you interact with them, sometimes you can't sense them. It's like they've hidden behind a wall and you just can't know them. I have a few friends that are 9s and it's like you can't get through to them. You can't connect to them. And I think I have a few clients that are 5s. It's very, very difficult to get them to talk. And when they do talk, so 9s are very pleasant when they talk, but you often don't feel that emotional connection. So the 9s, 5s, and 4s will give you that withdrawal. Now, a 4, though, is a little bit different. A 4 can have very compelling energy, and you can have a very powerful connection with them. Actually, more powerful than you can have with any other number. You can connect with a 4. But then the 4 will also give you really, really positive connection, but also they will run away and withdraw. So 4 is like back and forth energy. A 5 is always hidden. A nine is really nice and and kind of pleasant, but it's just hard to get through. It's kind of this thing you can't quite get your arms around, but you just can't get to them. A four will be very close to you and then they'll run away. They'll be very close to you and then they'll run away. So that's kind of the energy of a four. So it's kind of interesting to look at it from the energy standpoint. But let's take a look now at the blind spots. One of the ways to look at the blind spots is for me to just kind of go around the world. So I'll start with nine, just because it's at the top here. So a nine, we just said, is withdrawn energy. A nine is in the anger triad, but in every triad, there's one number that kind of completely denies that emotion, and that's the nine. So the nine has a lot of anger, but it's suppressed anger, and they may not even be aware of the anger. So they don't come across as angry, but how their anger can often come out as passive aggressive or by that stonewalling, where you just don't feel like you can get through to them. So let's talk about, though, what's the blind spot for the nine if you're a nine, and what is it that applies to the work situation. So for a nine, they feel like if they share their opinion or go against the group, that will make more conflict. And a nine is angry at the discord in the world. A nine wants everybody to be connected. One of the things that a nine will most appreciate is, a good example is when everybody sings together, whether you're singing together around a campfire or you're singing as a choir, there's this emotion that happens from several people harmonizing together. And I've felt that many times when I've just been a part of a group singing a song. It's just this very powerful feeling that you cannot get from one person singing alone. That's the energy that a nine is tapped into. And they're not only tapped into that in terms of music or a choir, but let's say if you watch perform as dancers, one dancer can look great, but if you've got several dancers doing the same motions at once, that's all of a sudden really powerful. In a work team, if everybody's moving towards the same goal together at once, that's a beautiful thing. It's all of this energy moving the same rock up the mountain and pushing on it in the same place. And suddenly you've got this amazing momentum and this collective energy that's really positive. That's what nines can make happen if they choose to. But their blind spot is they take themselves out of the picture. They make themselves insignificant. They see the harmony and they take themselves out of it because they feel like an individual and they don't want to disrupt it. They don't want to cause discord. So they take themselves and their anger completely out of the picture. They just shut it out. So that's their blind spot. And if we jump to this next slide, actually I can't do that here, but if you look at where they need to grow, what they really need to do is show more of themselves. And so the kind of the big growth lesson for a nine is, if I show more of myself, it actually doesn't disrupt the harmony. It actually allows people to be led by me, and I'm able to create more harmony. I'm able to create this togetherness because I'm sensitive to it and I know what it takes to get there. So that's kind of the journey for a nine at work, is to make sure that they speak up. I actually had a client that was a nine, and one of the things that we did is have her ask herself what was important to her, and have her go around and talk to her employees and say, this is important to me and why. But here's how long it took. In the beginning, she would get angry because it didn't feel like anybody cared about what was important to her. But then she realized that she didn't know what was important to her. So it took her about a year to keep asking herself, what's important to me? What's important to me? What's important to me? And make herself significant, really understand who she was and what she really wanted as an individual. Because a lot of nines, you ask them what they want, they don't know. They have no idea what they want. They've shut themselves so off from their individuality that they don't know. So for nines, that first project is just, what is it that I want? Who am I? What do I want? What's important? What's significant? Now, once the nines start getting clear on what's significant, then they still need to learn to speak up And so that's when I was able to have this person go around and say, this is important to me, this is important to me. And she's a very powerful leader in her organization right now. But it was a long process of growth, but it was a focused process of growth. So once we were able to use the Enneagram to zero in on things, she was able to get clarity on these things and self-monitor herself and really take herself through that growth. Now, the ones are really honed into right and wrong. So they're in the anger triad. Their anger doesn't come out directly like the eights. Their anger comes out more as judgment. And that's actually the blind spot for ones. So the ones are so focused on fixing things. And they could be focused on fixing themselves or they could be focused on fixing society, but they're often focused, if they're in an organization, on fixing things in the organization or fixing people. Teaching people how to do things better, improving things. That's all good stuff. But the thing is, the ones find themselves giving a lot of advice and often a lot of unsolicited advice. And what they don't realize and they can't get their heads around is how I'm just showing everybody how valuable I am. I'm just sharing all these improvements. Why wouldn't people want to improve? Why wouldn't people want things to get better? Why wouldn't people want to have high quality standards? I don't get it. Why don't they want to hear from me? Well, what happens is because their energy comes across as judgmental, with a little bit of that angry energy plus that intolerance for flaws that the one has, that's their blind spot, their intolerance for flaws, because they don't understand why anybody would want to tolerate a flaw. But since we're all human and we all have flaws, if you've got a one in your face telling you all the things that are wrong with you, you can imagine how defensive you would feel and how you really wouldn't want that person in your face because it makes you feel bad about yourself. So the one, the journey for them is to learn the value in flaws, like maybe they're part of the learning process, or how they highlight, how beautiful it is to have people that are not perfect, but maybe just a little bit flawed so that they can actually have strengths. So, as a one gets more accepting, then what happens is they have a lot less judgmental energy in their delivery. And when they have less judgmental energy in their delivery, then people receive their guidance better. So that's how a one can become more effective at work. Now, a two, twos, threes, and fours are sometimes they'll call it loss, sometimes they'll call it grief, sometimes they'll call it shame, sometimes they'll call it image. But essentially, this is the triad where it's all about me. So twos, threes, and fours are immersed in how other people see them and who they are, how they're not good enough, and how they need to be different. And so a two doesn't feel like it's okay for them to be very demanding of other people. And instead, what they want to do is be the one who serves. So they're putting aside their own needs or their own oxygen mask, and they're putting oxygen masks on everybody else. They make themselves indispensable to others at work, but then what ends up happening is they have nothing left for themselves. They tend to be overworked. Sometimes they run around helping people, and then they've neglected their own projects that are more important. And so then they don't get their own work done, and they may get negative feedback from a boss for not meeting their objectives, and they're so frustrated because they were so busy and so helpful, and they feel so underappreciated. So for twos, the journey is to really learn to allow others to give to them. So allow others the joy of giving, receive from others, you know, let other people take care of their own needs, make sure I get my own needs taken up first. So for sure, if I want to help people, I can, but I got to get my priorities taken care of first. I got to get my projects done first. Once a two learns to prioritize and set boundaries that way, then everything gets better for them because they get their own needs met, they get their own work done, they get their priorities taken care of, but everybody loves them because twos naturally care for people. So people feel heard when they're around twos. And that's a great feeling. Most of us human beings don't have enough people in our lives that we feel really hear us. So twos are the great listeners and caretakers of the world. And as a leader, they're very sought after once they've developed enough to take care of their own needs first so that they are actually getting results. So threes do get results, and threes are really good at getting results. The way threes handle this whole I'm not good enough thing is they work really hard to create an image that is just really accomplished. They don't like failure. But the problem that threes have in this triad, which is the shame triad or the loss triad or the grief triad, they're the ones that sort of deny their I'm not good enoughness. They deny their insecurities by putting forth such a confident image. And people around them sort of pick up on that in that they often seem too perfect. They seem too perfect, too flawless, too above everybody else. And that's the blind spot of the three. The three comes across as so perfect and so polished and so impressive that nobody feels like they can relate to him because all of us mere humans can't really touch a three. And a three never shows their vulnerability. A three doesn't show their flaws, and so it appears that the three doesn't have any flaws, and that makes it hard for us to connect with the three. Because if a three doesn't have any flaws, well, then they must never feel sad. They must not need us as friends, and so nobody really connects to a three. But when a three goes through their path of development, what they actually have to do is realize that people would rather connect to them if they see their humanity. But the three has to kind of go on the similar journey to a nine. They have to go through a journey and find themselves. They have to actually figure out who they really are without all of these prestigious degrees. A lot of times it happens when they lose a job. Then they have to do the soul searching, or when they feel like a failure. So a three will spiral down when they feel like a failure, but sometimes that's the best thing that could ever happen to them because it forces them to come to terms with who they are when they don't have all the pretty, prestigious strappings of success around them. And they've become just a homeless person on the street. I mean, it doesn't have to be that extreme, but the idea is, who am I if I'm just a homeless person on the street? Well, I'm still a human being. I'm still worthy. Who am I just as a person? And once they get in touch with that, then they can share that. And then what is an amazing thing that happens at work, and sometimes your highest achieving managers have to go through this journey, once they can accept that they're flawed and they can share those flaws with others, they become inspiring to others. Because before, when threes were so unapproachable, nobody can get close to them. Nobody can be inspired because they feel so different from threes. But if I'm sitting here and now you're showing me your flaws, now suddenly you become reachable to me. And I think, wow, you've accomplished all this, but you're also sharing all these fears you used to have. And I have those fears too. But if you had those fears and you conquered them and you accomplished so much, maybe there's a possibility that I could accomplish that too. And that's what makes a three so inspiring once they've done enough development work so that they're a little bit more in touch with themselves and they're a little bit willing to throw in some authenticity and not rely so much on their accomplishments as a crutch. So that's the three. The four is very much wants to be seen as special and unique. And so they have a long self-discovery journey ahead of them. So if you're a four, you're very much into self-discovery because you really want to find, almost insatiably want to find what that special thing is that makes you unique from all the ordinary people in the world. And it feels like that's what you need to really create magic in the world. But the journey for a four is to realize that there's magic in every ordinary moment. How does this apply to work? Well, fours tend to be more creative. They tend to be really good at self-expression. So that could be speaking, that could be drama, that could be art, if they're graphics art, that could be music, that could be anything. But a four will put all of themselves into it. They'll put a lot of emotion into what they do. And so they are incredibly compelling. But they're upset a lot of the time because they don't feel seen and they don't feel gotten and they don't feel special enough. Things start feeling ordinary too quickly and they get bored. And as soon as they're bored, then they dismiss things. Well, of course, that's a problem at work, right? Because things aren't always magical at work and there's a lot of boredom. But let's imagine an artist that's constantly seeking something beautiful to paint. And they're seeking and they're seeking and they're seeking, and they just can't find anything to paint because nothing's magnificent enough. But then they go through their path of personal growth and they start realizing the beauty in the ordinary. And when they do that, then what they end up doing is painting an ant. And that ant is the most phenomenal ant in the world because the four was the one that could find what was unique and special about that ant. So that's the journey for the four. So once the four has gone through their journey of personal growth at work, what ends up happening is you love being around fours because they can always help you think about things in a unique way and help you see a different perspective. And it's kind of exciting to be around fours because they have a lot of emotional energy and they can really just create kind of this intensity that is, I guess, exhilarating to a certain extent. So that's kind of the magic of a four. They kind of can create uniqueness and magic wherever they go. But before they go through that development, they can spiral down and get a little sulky and dramatic. So you've kind of got one extreme where they're sulky and dramatic, but the other extreme where they're compelling and magnificent. Fives, the big thing with fives is they'd rather close their office door and bury their heads in their work and become an expert. And they have a really hard time coming out from behind that door and talking to anybody. But they have so much wisdom to share. And, when you're in a work setting, you have to interact with people. And where the fives have most value usually is by teaching the thing that they're an expert at. And so for fives, the journey is to make other people less overwhelming. And so a lot of times what we do with fives is help them learn how to set boundaries, help them learn that other people will respect their boundaries so that they can go out and safely connect with people. And once they do, they tend to be the great teachers and mentors in their organizations. They become the resources that everybody can go to for that specialized area of expertise. And everyone feels safe with the five, knowing that the five knows everything about that. So if they have a question, that's where they can get it answered. But the five has to be open to receiving the questions and explaining things to people and proactively teaching people, and that's when they're at their best. Sixes. So sixes need to learn how to deal with anxiety. The main thing that happens for a six is that they tend to be the ones that point out all the negative things that could go wrong. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. It can be very, very useful in an organization. But sixes have a hard time making decisions and they have a hard time moving forward because every decision they make, something could go wrong. And so, with every decision they make, they could be creating more bad things in the world. So, for a six, they really have to get to a place where they trust themselves. And that's a long journey, but it starts with what do I fear and can I handle it? Now, with a six, they show up in two different types. One type tends to consistently seek guidance. Another type tends to more be the protector, like kind of fall into the policeman's role or something like that. But both types are hyper aware. They're hyper aware, they're hyper alert of all that can go down, and sometimes they can be paralyzed by that fear. So that's the thing for sixes. They can become more effective at work by becoming less paralyzed because they learn that they can handle anything that happens. The seven is one that hides from bad feelings and they run from one joyful thing to another. Well, you can imagine what goes wrong when you hide from bad feelings. You hide from problems, you ignore problems, they end up festering, you just assume someone else will fix it. You don't like to sit and patiently go through and dig through problems. It causes you too much anxiety. So with a seven, the big lesson is that if I sit still, I'm not going to get swallowed up in bad feelings. And there's actually can be some joy in stillness and some joy in, boring things. And even in negative emotions, often there can be joy and sadness. It can be kind of a poignancy. So that's the seven journey. And once they become more still, then they end up having less problems in their lives. eights, the big thing with eights is they tend to create fights without realizing it because they misperceive behaviors that people exhibit as uh, malicious intent. They misperceive malicious intent, and they will get angry and react to things. And they really do feel like they're justified in their reactions because someone didn't do something they were supposed to do, but they tend to look for intentions that aren't necessarily good, and then they very directly express their anger, and often they can throw out personal digs in that anger, and they can just shatter relationships. So with an eight, excuse me, their big journey is learning that really power isn't how much of a bully you are, right? Or how power isn't always come across, especially in an organization, is how loud you are or how forcefully you express your opinion. That power can also be, um, it could be even more powerful when you're quieter. It's kind of like if you want people's attention, whisper. And if you show, again, a little bit more vulnerability, that can be even more powerful. So for an eight who has a commanding presence, just imagine, we always see this in the movies, right? The male hero, he's the military hero, he's got the muscles, he's just, he's the tough guy, but we don't connect to the tough guy until we see him shed a tear, and then we're all just heartbreaking in love with him, right? So that's what happens to eights. They're the tough guy or the tough woman, but they don't show that vulnerability, and then when they do, people are just enthralled with them. So they get lots of followers when they start being more gentle in their demeanor and gentle with others. So here's a overview again of what we just went over at the other end of the journey. So nines discover that their voice is significant, and in doing so, they're able to get to the peace. Ones discover that flaws are part of the process, and in doing so, they become more accepting and people receive their advice and guidance. Twos, other people also deserve the joy of giving. They start getting their own needs met, they start getting more results, and they're able to be even more caring of others because they're not bitter. Threes, people connect more to them as they become more human. Fours start creating specialness in every moment because they realize it's all over the place. Five, learn to connect with people because they realize that they can set boundaries and people will respect them. And so people aren't so overwhelming after all. Sixes learn to trust themselves and trust that they can handle situations that come up. So they become a little bit less paralyzed. They make better decisions or quicker decisions, and they aren't so much of a naysayer. Sevens quiet down, so they become a little bit more thorough, they become a little bit more patient, and they deal with some of the negative stuff in their life, which actually creates more positive for them and less problems. And eights find the power in gentleness. So each of these numbers has kind of a unique blind spot, but as they go through their personal journey, they become tremendously powerful as human beings, and that shows up at work in a really positive way. The Enneagram is such a complicated model. Most of the people that are real experts in this model have had over 30 years experience just studying the model. So I use the Enneagram as one tool of many in my practice, and I don't claim to be an expert. So, I guess this is my caveat. A lot of what you've heard is what I'm thinking at the time about the numbers. I've got a little bit of experience. I've got experience with coaching clients. If you want to dive into this and really learn it well, there are some great books. If you're more spiritual, I haven't read this one, The Spiritual Dimension of the Enneagram, but I hear it's really good. The Wisdom of the Enneagram, the blue one, is my favorite because it actually maps out levels for every number. And at the bottom, you'll hear about the neurosis or the psychosis that happens with that number when they completely disintegrate. But at the top, you see what happens when they completely, you know, achieve their path of personal growth. And it is really helpful for people as they're doing coaching work and self development work to kind of look at this book as a guide and kind of assess where they are and what's the next step for them to get up to the next level. The Enneagram Made Easy, I like this one because it's a very easy way to begin to understand this very complicated tool. And especially if you don't have a lot of time, you just might want to flip through it and get whatever gems that you can out of it. So, thank you again for jumping in on the call, and feel free to email me with any questions that come up or any comments. This is one of my favorite assessments in terms of where it can take you in your growth, and so I wish you the best on your journey.